Okay, here we go. So this is going to be my review of my 2020 KTM 300 XC. First, I'm going to go over the good, and then I'm going to go over the bad. So the first is the good. First off, on these TPI bikes, I do not think that you're missing any power. I'm confident that you can and will climb anything a car bike will, and will do it without spinning. The packing on the silencer is still good on mine. I am on stock anything or stock everything. And there's a blue one that I'd like, but I've heard that the FMF ones don't last as long. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm still on the stock stuff, and my bike is currently at 80 hours. My favorite tire combo and my wheel setup on this bike, which has worked best for me, is the M59 up front with a standard moose bib from NewTek, and then a tubeless setup on the rear, normally around 8 psi, with a VE33S Get Coda. That tire can also be changed for a Dunlop AT81EX. That's the gummy version. It just really depends what you're riding. Obviously, if I have more silty terrain or loose stuff, I'm going to be on the VE33S Get Coda. And if it's more of a regular dirt or like hero dirt, then the AT81EX is just amazing, especially if you have some roots and stuff in there. And again, tubeless at 8 psi. It's hard to beat, and I haven't got a flat on that psi yet. And then I love the air filter design on these bikes. You really can't beat it, and it's actually hard to mess it up. A lot of the other bikes I have noticed are very easy to mess up. So I just like how simple it is to just swap in and out air filters, and you can actually reach all the way around the air filter to make sure that you don't get a little bit of a bump in there to where you have a air filter that's not sealing correctly. And actually the forks, they are very good. They're good and they're bad for their own reasons, but as long as you take the time to set them up properly, the forks are going to do very well for you up until, you start to get to a point where you need the aftermarket stuff. I like the seat. I haven't felt the need to do an aftermarket cover at all, although there's some ones that I'd like to have on the bike just because of the look, but I'll wait until it rips. I have no problem with the stock seat or the seat cover. I like how easy these bikes are to fuel. I know pre-mixing fuel wasn't a really big deal, but sometimes on the longer rides, I do like the thought of being able to drop down into town and just fuel up and then go without having to carry a small little premix bottle, and just adds a little bit of ease of mind to you. Also, the gearings on the bike, sometimes I feel like I could do with a little bit closer space between first and second, but otherwise it's good. But sometimes first feels really low and then second feels too high, so I just catch myself switching back and forth quite a bit. The Brembo brakes on this thing are incredible. You literally cannot beat these brakes. There's times when I come into a corner a little bit hot and the brakes will save your behind, because there's times that I've had both brakes just squeezed so hard where the Nissan brakes I feel would have locked up, because I had some trouble with them locking up. But I'll just squeeze I normally only keep one finger on the brake for obvious reasons, just because if you do have that sketchy moment and your first reaction is to grab, you're going to eat it, and you're going to eat it hard. The steering on the bikes, they can't be beat, at least yet. At this point, they turn so sharp that I haven't even felt the need to take the steering stops out. I don't feel like I need it. I don't really go on tight enough stuff to warrant having it. I can do plenty tight switchbacks without them out, and I haven't really ran into a problem. There's a couple trails this year that I might be going on that might need them out, but we'll see how that goes. The chain and sprockets, the stock stuff was actually really good. I think I changed mine out at 65 or 70 hours, right around there, and they were still good, but I don't like to run a chain too long because I'd rather just replace it than have it break. But everything was wearing really well, and I wasn't actually having any trouble with the chain or the sprockets or any crazy wearing. I just don't like to try to trust stuff too long. Now onto the bad things that I have noticed is these bikes from the factory, they don't idle well at all. Actually, there was a couple times where I'd be dropping down off of a rock, and as I go to get off the rock, the bike died. And when the bike died, my front end dropped and it almost put me on my head.
Wow, that piece of shit stalled at that time.
At that point, I knew I needed to get the idle screw mod. I tried to put it off as far as I could, but then I figured it's going to get me hurt if I keep trying to do it like that. So I did that. That sucks. You have to take the throttle body off and everything like that. They said that you don't have to reprime the fuel system. I did anyways, just because it's not worth losing a motor because of it. So I just put in that little connector and reprimed it. Those little connectors normally come with the bike when you first get it. Also, another thing what came on my bike, I don't know if it's a normal thing, but this was with mine. My girlfriend's 250 did not have this problem. But when I got the bike, as soon as I got it home, I was doing a check on it, and all the spokes were loose and the tire wasn't true. I kind of figured I would just tighten the spokes up and see if the tire worked its way out, and it actually did. So I just tightened the spokes how I normally would up until they were tight evenly, and then the tire, like the spokes came loose again very quickly, but the tire started to come in and it actually trued itself up. So I don't know what was going on there, but it kind of worked itself out. The air forks, although they are very good fork, when you mess with them, they are sticky at the very top part, and sometimes that will have your tire trying to slide out on you in certain spots. Sometimes it'll feel amazing, but sometimes on a flat corner it just feels like your forks just don't do anything and your tire just tries to leave you. Another thing for these TPI bikes is the fuel range actually isn't that great. The most you might be able to get is, anything above 65 miles, you're going to want a small little fuel can or something. You're going to want to pack gas, because I've had a 55-mile ride. Yes, it had some fire roads, things like that, but it was mostly single track. And by the time I got back, I wasn't even looking at my fuel because I didn't even think it was going to be a problem. 55 miles, come on, a 2.25 gallon tank. I didn't think it was going to be even close to a problem. I got back and I looked at my fuel, and I was actually scared when I looked at it, because there was a very close chance that I wasn't going to make it back to the truck. And I'm just glad that I did not see that light, or not the light, the fuel, because that would have ruined the day, because I was I was so close that I would have been worried for the past like 20-30 miles. Another thing that happened to me once, it's only happened once. I've heard of people having issues if they flip the bike upside down, but the TPI low oil light, I had the light come on. I was going across a desert section, just messing around with a side-by-side, just racing it, just not doing anything crazy, just like a small little drag race over some flats. And when I stopped, that oil light actually came on, and from what people are saying, it's a sensor, but the oil had just barely been topped off all the way up to the neck, and I don't understand how it could have shown a low oil light because there wasn't even any space inside the two-stroke oil reservoir. There wasn't anything. There wasn't any gap because it was still all the way up in the frame. So I don't know what that is all about. Nothing came out of it. I mean, I haven't really checked the piston or anything, but I didn't I didn't feel a loss of power or anything like that. I mean, we'll see when I do the rebuild. Another thing what has happened is I have hit false neutral a couple times on this bike. One time was in the middle of a pivot turn. The other time was while I was playing around in some little hills and some sand. I've hit false neutral. It's happened 3 times in 80 hours. I don't know what that's all about. I have fresh oil in it and everything like that. Fresh gear oil is what I mean. But and I always use the Motor X racing gear oil or whatever that one is. The 1041. It's what I think that one's at. And I keep hitting false neutral. Well, it's only happened 3 times. One time was in a pivot turn and it just straight up slammed me into the ground. So I don't know what that's all about, but that's another thing that we'll just have to check on when it gets rebuilt. Another thing is the stock bar position is really weird, especially if you're going uphill. Normally it can feel fine up until you're going uphill. Then I felt really cramped. If you flip the mounts around on the triple clamps, you can actually give yourself a couple millimeters forward. That made a world of difference, made me not even getting tired anymore.
Thank you.
And especially for like taller riders, before you do bar risers or anything like that, just flip those mounts around and see if that can work out for you before you spend the money on the bar risers. Also, even though the bike doesn't vibrate a lot, the bolts are always coming loose on these things. It seems like every time I check my clutch cover bolts or any of the subframe bolts, which I check them pretty much every other ride, they're always loose. So just keep an eye on those. I find it odd because the bike does not vibrate, and that's another really good thing for them. These bikes don't vibrate at all. My 300 vibrates a little more than my girlfriend's 250, but still it's minimal. Also, the little oil pump, that pretty much there's a little hose that runs from your reed cage up, and it goes into it comes out of an oil pump. That oil pump can come loose. It's a little 8mm bolt. You're going to want to be checking that every couple rides. That one can come loose too. If that comes loose, you're going to blow up the bike. These TPIs also have a overheating issue in slow terrain. I noticed this pretty much the first ride. It wasn't even on a technical trail. It just didn't have a lot of airflow, and I started smelling coolant. So you're going to need a fan on these bikes if you're doing slower terrain or steeper terrain. Another thing what's very annoying about these bikes is the power valve puncture. I had a ride where I was at, I think it was around 50 miles, 55, and I pretty much went over the bars. Yeah, it's my mistake, but it didn't even, the bike didn't fall hard. I pretty much took the hard hit of that crash, and when I picked up the bike, the coolant was pretty much just dribbling out pretty steadily. We actually ended up fixing it with Gorilla Tape. Gorilla Tape holds it amazing. If any of you guys have that problem or are worried about it, grab some Gorilla Tape. And it actually works very well for a trail hack. I went back, I kind of found a bell out and made it back probably another 5-10 miles, and I actually didn't lose as much coolant as I thought I would. So Gorilla Tape, if you're worried about it, just carry a small amount of Gorilla Tape and it can save you if that does happen. Plus there's a couple little coverings that you can get for these, for the elbow of that radiator, so you can actually protect it. So those are nice to have. I've since got those and it works. You're going to want as well, while we're talking about this area, you're going to want to delete the thermostat if you have that ability. If you live in a warmer area or you ride single track, you're going to want to delete the thermostat. I haven't seen one that doesn't leak. If they don't leak, they're going to, pretty much. So normally I just delete those because there's these stupid little clamps that they have, and there's like 6 of them on the thermostat, and almost all the time the one that's pointing down always leaks. So I just delete them and don't worry about them. Also, there's a power valve gasket that they switched to in 2020 that does leak. It's just a small little paper gasket. I guess now they changed the part number to a 2019 one. So if you have a 2020 and you have a lot of dirt buildup over on the right side of your motor behind the expansion chamber, right next to the frame, right by that power valve cover, if you have a lot of dirt buildup there, you're probably leaking. So all you have to do is just order the 2019 gasket. I'm pretty sure the whole part number has been swapped from now on. And then another thing what I've noticed is the forks, they will beat you down if you're hitting like a acceleration bump chop. There's a couple times when I've hit the chop from acceleration bumps. The first 1 or 2 will be fine. Then that 3rd one, 4th one, and 5th one, you just get squirrely. So I kind of figured a way how to minimize the deflection on those. I just kind of lean a little further back, but the stiction at the front of the fork, just at the beginning of the stroke on the fork, the acceleration bumps will beat you on those. So just another thing to keep in mind. But even though that's a pretty big list for the cons, keep in mind I'm at 80 hours, and that's a pretty small list for that many hours. I've had a ton of fun on this bike. It's a single track weapon, and I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, I'm still even on the stock battery, so I mean, you have very few things to worry about with this bike. So do I recommend it? I definitely recommend it. I think that these KTMs are more than worth it. Again, there's a few small things, but nothing that can't be fixed, and the pros far outweigh the cons. And give one of them a ride, you won't regret it on the trail. They just can't be beat. Thank you, and enjoy watching the rest of the video.
That's where I need to pay attention right there, is like when I get under some pretty good acceleration. That's when I normally grip with my hands. It's normally my braking hand that gets the most fatigued the quickest. So what I'm starting to do is I'm starting to incorporate a little bit more rear brake. That seems to be helping a lot. Trump. There's a little stump there. Back off of her for a minute. Get out of some of the dust. Man, she flows. Little idiot.
Ew.
What?
There's a dead snake.
Oh.